The moment before I died, I was talking to myself about remembering to buy cat food. The moment after, I was having a conversation with Jesus about those very same thoughts and how they could have been prayers all along. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Rosemary Kendrick, and what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about prayer, about being with God, and about the constant conversation we could be having with heaven. That evening had been like any other. I'd just finished reviewing the hymn selections for Sunday's service, my reading glasses perched on my head as I made my final notes. My cat, Moses, was curled up on the piano bench beside me, purring contentedly as I hummed, "Great is thy faithfulness," under my breath. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9, and I remember thinking I should head to bed soon. My daughter Jenny was bringing the grandkids over tomorrow, and those precious little ones always needed Grandma at full energy. I had my usual evening prayer time to look forward to first. For 30 years, I'd kept my prayer routine, 15 minutes before bed, kneeling beside my mattress like I'd done since childhood, keeping my prayer journal updated with my conversations with the Lord. Sometimes I wondered if I was doing it right, if my prayers were reaching high enough, going deep enough. That night, I had no idea that God was about to completely transform my understanding of what prayer could be. The house creaked, an odd sound, different from its usual settling noises. Moses's ears perked up, and he let out one of his concerned little chirps. "It's probably nothing," I said aloud, more to comfort myself than him. Living alone since Harold passed 5 years ago, I'd gotten used to talking to myself, to Moses, to the empty rooms. Looking back, I wonder if God was already trying to show me something about all those scattered words I spoke throughout my days. I stood up from the piano bench, my joints protesting slightly. "Should we go check it out, Moses?" The cat just blinked at me, unhelpful as ever. I smiled and shook my head, heading toward the staircase that led to the basement. The light switch at the top wasn't working. I'd been meaning to call Jenny's husband about that. I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight, my slippered feet feeling for each step in the dim light. That's when Moses darted between my legs, probably chasing one of the shadows cast by my phone's light. I reached out instinctively, trying to catch my balance, but my reading glasses fell from my head, and as I grabbed for them, my phone clattered down the stairs. The world tilted, and in that suspended moment before gravity took over, I had time for just one thought. Lord, help. I didn't feel the fall. There was no pain, no fear, just a sudden shift from tumbling through darkness to floating in light. But before I tell you about that light, about the presence that enveloped me, and about the conversations that would reshape my entire understanding of walking with God, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story about dying and meeting Jesus. It's about discovering that every moment of our lives, every random thought, every whispered word, every quiet wondering, can be part of an ongoing conversation with heaven. And it all started with a cat, a dark staircase, and a lifetime of talking to myself that God was about to transform into something extraordinary. When they told me later that I had been clinically dead for 9 minutes and 47 seconds, I wasn't surprised. Time works differently in that other place. Those minutes held decades of understanding, centuries of wisdom, and a lifetime of lessons about prayer that I'm still unwrapping today. But what did surprise me was how simple it all was. How the very thing I'd been seeking through my structured prayer times had been available to me in every moment, in every thought, in every breath. The doctors called it a near-death experience. I call it the moment I finally learned how to pray. And not just pray, but to live in constant communion with Jesus, turning the running commentary of my mind into an ongoing conversation with heaven. The first thing I noticed wasn't the light, it was the silence. Not an empty silence, but the kind of profound quiet you sometimes find in churches just before dawn, when it feels like the whole world is holding its breath in anticipation. My body felt impossibly light, as if all the aches and worried thoughts I'd carried for years had simply dissolved. I was aware of being somewhere else, though somewhere doesn't quite capture it. Imagine being inside a moment of perfect peace, if peace were a place you could walk through. The light came then, not from above or around, but from everywhere at once, like being immersed in liquid gold that somehow didn't blind or overwhelm. That's when I saw myself below, crumpled at the bottom of the stairs, Moses pacing anxiously nearby. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. More than calm. I felt held. The way I used to hold my babies when they were small, the way Harold would hold my hand during thunderstorms. But this was deeper, as if every atom of my being was being cradled by love itself. "You've been trying so hard to reach me." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, and I knew it instantly, not because it was thunderous or magnificent, though it was, but because it was achingly familiar, as if I'd been hearing it all my life, but only now recognized it. Jesus stood before me, though stood isn't quite right. He was simply there, more real than anything I'd ever known, more present than presence itself. His eyes held such tenderness that I began to weep, though my tears weren't physical anymore. "Lord," I started, falling into my habitual prayer posture even in this spiritual state. Rosemary. His smile held such knowing love that I stopped mid-sentence. "You've set aside such careful times to speak with me. 15 minutes every night, faithful as the sunrise. But what about all the other moments? What about when you're humming hymns at the piano, or worried about Jenny's children, or talking to Moses about your day?" I felt something shift in my understanding, like when you finally see the pattern in a piece of music you've been struggling to learn. "Those could have been prayers?" I asked, though even as I said it, I began to understand. "Every thought can be a prayer," he said, and suddenly I was aware of all the thoughts I'd had just that day, about the cat food, about the creaking house, about the hymn selections. "You've been speaking to me all along, Rosemary. You just didn't know you were doing it." He gestured, and I saw something extraordinary, like golden threads extending from every thought I'd ever had, each one a potential connection to the divine. Some were bright and strong, the ones from my intentional prayer times. But there were countless others, dimmer but just as real, from all the moments I'd talked to myself, worried about my children, hummed hymns, or simply wondered about the world. "But how?" I asked, watching these threads of potential prayer shimmer around us. "How do I turn all those scattered thoughts into real prayer?" "You've already begun," he said, and his presence seemed to encompass all of me, all of my lifetime of thoughts and words and wonderings. "The moment you realize I'm always listening is the moment every thought becomes a conversation with heaven." I was about to ask more when I felt something shift. The golden light began to pulse, and I sensed there was more, so much more. He wanted to show me. But first, he needed me to understand something fundamental about the nature of prayer itself, something that would change everything about how I communicated with heaven. The light grew brighter, and with it came a clarity I'd never known before. This wasn't just about learning new prayer techniques. It was about discovering that I'd been standing in the middle of a divine conversation my entire life, never fully realizing it was taking place. "Are you ready?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. We both knew I'd been ready my whole life for this moment. Ready to see what prayer really is? And that's when the real revelations began. What happened next is both the easiest and hardest thing to describe. Easy, because the truth Jesus showed me was so simple it took my breath away. Hard, because putting heavenly understanding into earthly words feels like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup. Jesus gestured, and suddenly we were walking through what seemed to be my own memories. but not just seeing them. We were experiencing them in a way that showed me both what was and what could have been. He showed me a moment from just last Tuesday. I was at the grocery store, mentally running through my list. Need to remember coffee for the church kitchen, I'd thought to myself. And those cookies Margaret likes for the choir break. Just everyday thoughts, the kind that fill all our heads. But now, Jesus showed me how that same moment could have been different. Not by changing my actions or even my words, but by simply being aware of his presence. The same thoughts, transformed. Lord, remind me to pick up coffee for our fellowship time. And you know how Margaret's been struggling since her husband's been ill. Maybe those cookies she loves will brighten her day. You see? His voice was gentle. Prayer isn't about changing the words. It's about recognizing who's always listening. He showed me moment after moment from my life, driving to choir practice, watering my plants, sorting through Harold's old photographs. Every single instant could have been a conversation with heaven, not through any special formula or ritual, but simply by being aware that I was never truly talking to myself. But Lord, I said, watching these transformed moments flow by, I always thought prayer had to be, well, more formal, more structured, more holy. His laughter was like music. Rosemary, what could be more holy than a child speaking to her father? When your grandchildren run to you, shouting about a butterfly they've seen or a scraped knee that needs kissing, is that formal? Is their love for you less real because they don't schedule it? That's when he showed me something that moved me to my core. I saw all my years of faithful prayer times. Those nightly 15 minutes, the Sunday services, the grace before meals. They glowed like gold in my memory. But then he showed me something else. All the moments in between, countless missed opportunities for communion, like untuned strings on a piano that could have made such beautiful music. Your dedicated prayer times are precious to me, he said. But they were meant to be the foundation, not the whole building. They're meant to remind you of what's possible in every moment. He then showed me how this continuous prayer worked. It wasn't about constantly speaking or even constantly thinking about God in some forced way. Instead, it was about living in the awareness of his presence, the way you're aware of sunshine on your skin even when you're not thinking about it. But Lord, I asked, how do I help others understand this? How do I share what you're showing me? His answer came through another series of visions, conversations with my grandchildren about talking to Jesus like a friend who's always there, choir members discovering how to turn their daily scales into prayers, my women's Bible study group learning to transform their worry circles into prayer circles. He showed me how to explain it simply. Imagine you're on the phone with your dearest friend all day long. Sometimes you're talking. Sometimes you're just sharing comfortable silence. Sometimes you're going about your tasks, but always aware they're on the line. That's what constant prayer can be like. But the most beautiful part was how he showed me this practice would deepen over time. Like learning a new language, it would start with simple phrases and gradually grow into fluent conversation. He showed me future moments. Sitting with my youngest granddaughter, her questions about butterflies becoming shared moments of wonder with the Creator. Cooking Harold's favorite recipes, the familiar motions becoming a dance of remembrance and gratitude. Even those sleepless 3 a.m. moments transformed into peaceful encounters with the God who never slumbers. This is how you bring heaven's conversation to earth, he said. Not by leaving your life to pray, but by letting your whole life become prayer. As this section of the vision began to fade, I understood something profound. This wasn't just about prayer. It was about living in constant awareness of God's presence, turning every thought and action into potential communion with heaven. But there was still one more crucial lesson he needed to share. As the final lesson began to unfold, I felt a gentle tugging, like a thread being pulled through fabric. and I knew my time in this heavenly space was drawing to a close. But Jesus wasn't finished yet. "Rosemary," he said, his voice filled with such tenderness it seemed to wrap around my soul. "What you've learned here isn't just for you. It's for all my children who've felt that prayer was a bridge too hard to cross, a language too difficult to learn." He showed me one final vision, a tapestry of human thoughts, billions of internal conversations happening all at once. Some were directed to him intentionally as prayers, glowing bright like stars. But countless others, worry thoughts, happy thoughts, wondering thoughts, were like unconnected circuits, full of potential, but not yet complete. "This is why I brought you here," he said, "to show you, and through you to show others, that the connection is already there. It just needs to be recognized." Then he shared something that made everything crystal clear. Prayer isn't about reaching up to heaven. It's about realizing heaven is already reaching down to you. The tugging sensation grew stronger. The golden light began to fade, but Jesus' presence grew even more intense. "Remember," he said, "even when you go back, even when this experience feels distant like a dream, I am just as present as I am right now. Every thought can still be a conversation with me. I wanted to stay, to learn more, to bask in his presence forever. But I understood. This glimpse of heaven's perspective wasn't meant to keep me there, but to transform how I lived on earth." The transition back was gentle but disorienting. First came the awareness of pain. My physical body had taken quite a fall after all. Then sounds filtered in. Worried voices, my daughter Jenny crying, paramedics speaking in calm, professional tones. Finally, I opened my eyes. "Mom!" Jenny's face appeared above me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've been unconscious for almost 10 minutes. We thought..." Even before I could speak, even through the pain and confusion, I felt it. That same presence I'd experienced in the heavenly realm. Not as overwhelming, but just as real. And my very first thought wasn't really a thought at all, but a prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for letting me come back to love them a little longer." The paramedics insisted on taking me to the hospital, of course. There were tests to be run, observations to be made. My body had some healing to do, but even in the fluorescent-lit hospital room, with its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell, every moment was different now. Every thought was a potential conversation with heaven. When the nurse came in to check my vitals, "Lord, thank you for giving her skills to help others." When Jenny stepped out to call her brother, "Father, comfort her heart, she got quite a scare." When the doctor explained about mild concussion symptoms, "Jesus, help me be a patient patient." It's been 3 months since that night on the stairs. The bruises have healed, and Moses has finally forgiven me for scaring him. But the real transformation hasn't been physical at all. My entire existence has become a continuous conversation with heaven. Not because I'm special or particularly holy, but because I finally understand that's how it was always meant to be. My choir members have noticed the difference. "There's something different about your prayers now," Margaret said just last week. "They feel more real." She's right. Because now, when I pray with others, it's not about finding the right words. It's about sharing the conversation that's already happening. Even my grandchildren are catching on. Little Sarah, just 6 years old, told me yesterday, "Grandma, I talked to Jesus while I was swinging at the park." Her eyes were bright with discovery. He didn't say anything back, but I know he was smiling. Yes, he was, precious girl. He always is. So that's my story, how a fall down the stairs became a rise into new understanding. But really, it's not just my story. It's an invitation Jesus asked me to share, an invitation to turn your internal monologue into an eternal dialogue, to transform your self-talk into God talk, to realize that every moment of every day can be lived in heaven's conversation. Remember, prayer isn't about reaching up to heaven. It's about realizing heaven is already reaching down to you, and it always has been.